Good evening, everyone. I'm Linsey Davis. Believe it or not, we are 3 weeks until the election, and at this time, 3 weeks from now, polls will have closed in the all-important state of Pennsylvania. For both candidates, the Keystone State certainly looms large. A win there could be a big indication of just who will win the election overall. And we just saw the two candidates for Senate there face off. Senator Bob Casey and businessman Dave McCormick had a spirited debate tonight. In Pennsylvania is also where Donald Trump and Kamala Harris spent much of the day on Monday. This comes as more than 5 million Americans have already voted early, including at least 415,000 Pennsylvanians who have already mailed in ballots. And Terry Moran joins us now live. Terry, I know you were able to watch that debate. What stood out to you?
Well, it was a fierce debate. It was tough, and you can sense the closeness of this race by the intensity of that debate. Both candidates, both Dave McCormick and Senator Bob Casey, just slugging away at each other. A lot of what you might call negative attacks, because this is that close. They're trying to essentially take each other down, and in some ways, this is a race about who do you like less, incumbent politicians or hedge fund managers, right? Casey's been in the Senate a long time, since 2007, and McCormick made the most of that. And McCormick ran one of the largest hedge funds in the world, investing in places like China and a lot of, Saudi Arabia and all the rest of it. And Casey made as much of that as he could. At the end of the day, I think you heard in Bob Casey a sense that he believes he's closer to the heart of Pennsylvania, and tried to staple Dave McCormick to Donald Trump, who is also popular, but he lost the state the last time around. So I just thought it was a fierce debate, one substantive on issues that Pennsylvanians care about, but also one that got personal because it is so close. They've got to take each other down. Yeah,
it certainly was personal. Even at one point, Casey was saying, you even claim that you grew up as a farmer, and then that's not even true. But Terry, Pennsylvania, obviously, we've talked about just how critical it is, and you've often talked about just how many Americans in the middle consistently want to see politicians work together. Let's play this one interaction and get your take on the other side.
Real quick, 20 seconds. Let's say both of you were the senators of Pennsylvania. How would you work with each other? 20 seconds each.
Well, we'd have to find common ground. Right now, I don't see much with Senator Casey. I think he is increasingly, listen, Bob Casey went to the Senate to change Washington. Washington changed Bob Casey. He is completely out of step with the values and views of Pennsylvanians. He's voted for a series of things that have made our Commonwealth much worse. So I think he needs to be replaced. And that's why I'm running, because I think career politicians like Bob Casey are really hurting our great country.
I think there's plenty of things we could work together on. It should start with things that are bipartisan right now. The bipartisan border deal, supported by the Border Patrol Union. I don't know why he wouldn't support that. It doesn't make any sense. When he knows that we could advance the ball based upon the expertise of the Border Patrol. But while I was doing that bipartisan work in Pennsylvania, he was investing in our adversaries, investing in China and investing in Russia.
Let's move on to the next topic.
Well, Terry, a lot to unpack there. What do you think that Americans in the middle thought about what they heard tonight?
Well, on that question in particular, and you're right, I think Americans want pragmatic solutions to real problems. Bob Casey's problem is that he is an incumbent at a time when Americans are very dissatisfied with the status quo, especially on the Democratic side. Biden's ratings are very, very low, and McCormick tried to attach Casey to Biden. On the other hand, the first thing out of Dave McCormick's mouth is, well, there's nothing we could work on because, I don't agree with him on anything. And that's the kind of in-your-face politics that is identified with the Trump movement that I think also alienates people. So, later in the debate, they did agree that they could agree on some things around gun safety, but not much. And that's basically where we are. And it's only going to get worse because the parties are so divided ideologically in a way they weren't. Years ago, parties had liberals and conservatives, believe it or not. They had liberals and conservatives in them, in both parties, and therefore there was more room to find compromise. Not anymore. And I think that's what we saw tonight, especially with that question.
And let's take a step back and talk about Pennsylvania as a whole. You, of course, were there last night for the Trump rally and have reported on the ground in the state extensively. Both candidates have bet big on Pennsylvania. Do you think that their messages are getting through to voters, in particular those who are still undecided?
Yeah, there are undecided voters still. I'm sure there are. It is a vanishing species, however, and one that a lot of political pros will tell you, if people are undecided announce that they're undecided at this stage of the race, it means they probably aren't that connected to politics and aren't going to vote. That said, this is Pennsylvania and so many of these states, just like the country, so closely divided. The reason that this is closely divided is because Pennsylvanians are as split as the rest of the country, perhaps even more so. And it's the big kahuna of the battleground states, 19 electoral votes. That whoever wins Pennsylvania is almost certainly likely to win the election. And I think what people want to hear is, Pennsylvanians want to hear is, do something that is going to fix the inflation that I've been dealing with, the immigration, which is a big issue as well, and won't, destroy democracy and take away women's rights. And so those are issues that advantage either side, polls show, and they're divided right down the middle. So I think it's going to come down to the wire, come down to that get out the vote, and come down to, the exhausting last few weeks of the campaign. The candidates are going to want to be everywhere in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvanians are going to want to judge them and then go to the polls. We'll see what happens.
To the victor go the spoils, really is the state of play in Pennsylvania there. Terry Moran, our thanks to you as always. And joining us now to dive into the most recent polls from Pennsylvania is Nathaniel Rakich, our senior elections analyst for ABC's 538. Nathaniel, thanks for joining us. Democratic incumbent Bob Casey still in the lead, but that lead has been shrinking in recent polls.
Yeah, it has. So according to 538's latest polling average, Casey is up by about 5 points over McCormick. But over the last 2 months, that has shrunk from about a 9-point lead back in August. So Casey's been kind of flat, as you can see in the graph in front of you. McCormick has been gaining, which, of course, is cause for concern for Democrats.
And while we're at it in the race for president, what are polls from Pennsylvania saying?
Polls in Pennsylvania in the presidential race are even closer. Harris has less than a single percentage point lead there. It's about 48% to 47%.
Tight. Why might it be that Trump in Pennsylvania is polling better than McCormick?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to name recognition at the end of the day. So obviously Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are very well-known figures in Pennsylvania. You see very few undecided voters there, with 48% in favor of Harris and 47% for Trump. Casey himself is at 48% as well. He's an incumbent senator, so it makes sense that a lot of Pennsylvanians know who he is. McCormick is kind of lagging Trump's vote share, I think, because there are just a lot of Pennsylvanians who haven't made up their mind about him. And I think there is reason to expect that he can continue to grow in the polls because he has that 3-point gap between his vote share and Trump's vote share. So if he's able to close that gap, which isn't a given, this could end up being just as close of a race in the Senate as it is for president.
Obviously, when we're looking at the polls at large, everything is very close. Are there any indicators, anything that you can look at that might perhaps read the tea leaves a little bit more when you really take a deep dive into the numbers?
Unfortunately, there's just no silver bullet to these things. Some people will try to take a look at early voting numbers, but that can really go awry. Obviously, Democrats are known for voting early and by mail more so than Republicans, so it's not a surprise that they're voting in big numbers right now in Pennsylvania and other states. But really just kind of have to look at the polls. And, we can't predict for sure what the polls are going to look like 3 weeks from now. Maybe McCormick isn't able to close that gap, and I think that might tell us something. Maybe there are some Trump voters who won't pull the lever from McCormick because they think he's a carpetbagger or whatnot. He's kind of been slammed with that label by Casey. But, I think at the end of the day, whatever the polls say on Election Day is going to be your biggest guide.
All right, Nathaniel Rakich, our thanks to you as always. And joining us now for more is Political Playbook co-author and ABC News contributor Rachel Bade. Rachel, thank you for joining us. As you just heard there, Nathaniel was showing us the polls just super tight between former President Trump and Vice President Harris. Are we seeing the same for down ballot races, or do you expect either Harris or Trump to do worse than their congressional counterparts on the ballot?
Well, it's interesting because Trump, for a long time, I've been covering Hill races for over a decade now, and we always talk about how he drags down Republicans. This race is different. He's actually pulling ahead of a lot of Republicans and helping them. And, just to go back to what Nathaniel was just talking about, one interesting thing that we're seeing at the last minute here is how the map has sort of changed a little bit. I can tell you when I talk to Republican leaders in Congress and in the Senate specifically, they weren't talking about Pennsylvania earlier this year as one of those places that they thought they were most likely to flip. And so the fact that the polling has closed and tightened so much there, it's sort of making them rethink things at the last second. I mean, I can tell you originally Republican leaders were looking at places like Ohio, places that are super red, that Donald Trump is expected to carry by a wide margin, thinking that Sherrod Brown was frankly toast. And yet Sherrod Brown in their own internal polling seems to be pulling ahead of their Republican candidate, Bernie Moreno. So now they're looking more at Bob Casey thinking, okay, maybe this is a guy who we can pick off. But one thing I'll say overall, Linsey, is that Republicans and Democrats, both of them agree, maybe not on the record for Democrats, a lot of them privately will say this, that they do think the Senate is probably gone, that Republicans are very likely to flip the chamber. They only need one seat if Donald Trump wins the White House, 2 seats if Kamala Harris wins. They've already got basically a seat in the bag in West Virginia with Joe Manchin, a centrist Democrat, retiring there. They're expected to put a Republican there. John Tester in Montana, he is falling further and further behind. That's 2 right there. So at this point, it's more of a question on the margins. How many can they pick up beyond a majority?
And one big issue tonight, of course, was the issue of abortion, with David McCormick taking a line from former President Trump's playbook, saying abortion should be a, quote, state issue. Whoever controls Congress could pass a law that either enshrines reproductive rights or outlaws it. Will the energy behind abortion, do you think, ultimately decide who wins Congress?
You know, if past is prologue, yes. I mean, in recent elections, we have seen people turn out and vote with abortion on their minds, and that has very much benefited Democrats. But the thing about this cycle is that when you look at the polling, when you talk to some of these pollsters and folks who are in the focus groups actually talking to voters, the thing that is top of mind for them is actually not abortion. It's things like the economy. It's things like crime. It's things like the border. And on these issues, Donald Trump and Republicans writ large clearly have the advantage. However, in these sort of focus groups, I've heard from people that when you actually bring up abortion, it sort of lights a fire in the room for a lot of women, especially. People are very upset still about the Dobbs decision. They want to feel like they have freedom in their reproductive rights. And so to the extent that Democrats can actually keep abortion front and center, the better they will actually do in a lot of these races.
And our ABC News Ipsos polling shows a big 17-point gender gap, with Trump leading among men with 8 points and Harris leading among women with 9 points. Is this about on par with what we've seen in other elections, or is there a shift that's happening here?
Well, it depends on which pollsters you ask. So our pollster here at ABC thinks that it's basically on par with what we've seen before. But if you do talk to some others, they will point specifically to the younger aged group. If you look at younger voters, the gender gap has very much widened. And the thing about that is, you know, these voters are going to get older. If this trend continues, then the gender gap is going to be moving in an even more bigger and more extreme direction. I think the big question everyone is asking as we get very close to the election, 3 weeks now, as you said at the beginning of this segment, is who does this actually advantage? I mean, for a long time, a lot of political reporters, and myself included, analysts and such, were saying that, you know, women running away from Trump, it's really going to help Harris. And that is true. I mean, they've been repelled by Trump because of abortion, because of J.D. Vance's childless cat lady comments, because of Trump's temperament. But Donald Trump has almost given up on wooing women, and he has very much leaned into trying to target men, not just conservative men, but sort of socially liberal men, Latino men, Black men, and he's had some success with that, such that the Harris team is now worried. But one last thing I'll mention on this, Linsey, and that is if it comes to a boys versus girls election, Harris still does have the advantage. There are more women in this country, and historically they actually vote at higher rates than men, so she certainly has that going for her.
All right, well, we will see how it all plays out in 3 weeks. Rachel Bade, our thanks to you. Now I want to bring in Matt O'Donnell from our partner station WPVI in Philadelphia. Matt, I know it was a quick turnaround for you. You were just there in the debate room and now with us, so we really appreciate you joining us. Give us a sense of what stood out to you tonight.
Linsey Davis, our good friend from New Jersey, thanks so much. Great to see you. So I was sitting here with my colleagues Shari Williams and Ilya Garcia. Both candidates, David McCormick and Senator Bob Casey, left the room about 15 minutes ago, and you could feel the tension drop significantly. I mean, this is a contentious race here right now, and you know from being here in Philadelphia with the presidential debate with David Muir, this could swing the Senate one way or the other. It would be a huge pickup for Republicans because of the incumbency with the Democrats. Pennsylvania is the swingiest swing state in the history of swing states. It's just crazy. You should see the ads on our television station. It is nonstop. I don't even know if they sell cars anymore. And the presidential race, so this could be a down ballot situation. You could see a Harris victory, a Trump victory, helping one or either of these candidates, or maybe people are going to split their tickets. We just don't know. And I know you were talking to a pollster there, or talking about the poll. The race started out in the teens. Casey was way ahead. It's narrowing, and we thought that it would. I saw the Siena New York Times poll. McCormick's only down by 4 points. And so these guys, they went at each other during this 60-minute debate, contentious and at times, Linsey, personal.
Right. Yeah, we did certainly see that. And Senator Bob Casey, of course, the incumbent there, he has won every single one of his races since 2006 by at least 9 points. What do you think the possible path to victory would be for his opponent, Republican David McCormick, here?
I mean, and some would say, I mean, Republicans would say that Senator Casey never really had a race like this, one that's close. You mentioned he's won everyone pretty widely. I would have to go with the economy, and that's probably the number one issue in every single state across the union. And I would have to give the edge to McCormick in that, just because Casey is the incumbent. Inflation's been here for 3 years now. And so McCormick has that edge where he can just blame Casey. And that was our opening question in the debate. We tried to stay on topic with things, but then things devolved. And Casey attacked McCormick for his hedge fund. And McCormick attacked Casey for trying to boss him around about the military because he is a veteran. But we tried to keep things on issue. But yeah, I mean, economy and abortion -- by a hair, a whisker.
And you guys did do a great job of keeping them on task and on track. You mentioned some of the attacks that they had for each other there. Was there anything in particular that either said to the other that surprised you, or was this pretty much what you were expecting?
I wrote a couple down, Linsey, so I'll just read them. McCormick would look directly at Senator Casey saying this: "Face it, Bob, you are a liberal. Don't preach to me. No one flip-flop more in the Senate." Casey returns, looks at McCormick. "You are kind of like a lapdog for the Republican nominee." And both of them, over and over again, flat out looked at each other in the eye and said, "You are lying, you are lying, you are lying." The race is getting contentious.
The lapdog definitely was a memorable one.
That surprised me.
Yeah. All right, Matt O'Donnell, always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much.